Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. My name is Rebecca Lee and I am the Online Services Coordinator here at ACCESS Employment. And we do have our special guest today, Audrey Wilson. Hi Audrey.
Hi Rebecca.
Hi everyone, hi Audrey. So today we do have the last webinar of our online event series today. And I just wanted to welcome all of you here if you're coming in for the very first time. Just a little bit about ACCESS Employment. So we have been around for over 30 years, and ACCESS Employment has been providing services and programs to job seekers as well as new Canadians. We have across the GTA area, Toronto area, over five locations, and have established over 2,000 plus employee relationships across a variety of sectors and industries as well. We also deliver a variety of sector-specific programs, communications training, and mentoring programs for our job seekers. And most recently, we also deliver online services, such as this webinar you're hearing today, to pre-arrival job seekers who are approved to land in Canada, as well as our job seekers that are located all across Canada. So thank you so much for attending. So we are going to go right into the webinar and introduce Audrey. So Audrey, I'm just going to pass the slides over to you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Great, thank you. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate that you took time out of your schedule to join me for the webinar on business communication skills for internationally trained professionals. I am Audrey Wilson, and my current professional position is Program Director with the University of Toronto's School of Continuing Studies. So for those of you who are not familiar with the University of Toronto, we're Canada's largest university. We have about over 75,000 students attend the school every year. So the portion that I work for, the School of Continuing Studies, is a division of the university, and we focus on non-degree education. So we offer over 80 certificate programs, over 600 courses, a variety of topics from business and professional studies, creative writing, languages, and arts and science. And we also have an English Language Institute, which features courses in English. And we also have a course in business communication skills. So if you're interested in learning more, taking a little bit more time than just this short webinar, you can definitely take a look for more information on that. From a personal perspective, I am also an immigrant to Canada, and as of November 1st this year, I will have been in Canada for 4 years. Before immigrating, my career was focused in post-secondary education, where I primarily worked with continuing education, much like I do now, and graduate degree programs. So as you can see from this slide, my career in post-secondary education began in 2007 and continued until I immigrated in 2013. So about 6 months before I immigrated, I started applying for jobs in my field, but I really discovered that it was very difficult to make connections from a distance, and that some Canadian employers were really interested in speaking with candidates who were already located in Canada. So, but fortunately, once I immigrated and I was in the country, I had much more success meeting with people who worked in my industry to learn what post-secondary in Canada was like. I looked at my career options and what those looked like in Canada, and learned what I needed to do to get back into post-secondary, to get back on my career track. So what I learned was that the market is different and that the jobs were not as widely available as I was accustomed to. So, and just because it was a smaller market. So this really meant I had to take a look and set some short-term goals, some long-term goals, and figure out where was the best fit for me and where were the best jobs to pursue while I took the steps that I needed to do to get back on track with my career. And this is a little bit why there is a gap between my first job in Canada and my first job in Canada in my original career field. So all this to say, it might take you time before you find employment, but that it is possible to find a job. So stay positive. Initially, it might not be your ideal job, but look at your first or second jobs in Canada as a learning experience. They'll provide you with the opportunity to acclimate to Canada. You'll learn more about the culture, you'll learn more about employment expectations, and the pace of life in general. So some of the things that I did that helped me be more successful in finding a job, also a job and then a job in my original career field, were researching how my original career translated in Canada. So before I immigrated, I started looking at post-secondary institutions in Canada. I took a look at their job boards to see what kind of positions were available. I did some online research and I read more about the places that I was considering employment. Because I work in education, there is the Ministry of Education in Canada, and I utilized the government website to find out more about the industry. I used a lot of job sites similar to ACCESS, looking for more information on what I could expect when I immigrated, what the expectations were. I also set up some informational interviews with different organizations I was interested in working with. So that really gave me a little bit more insight into where I might fit with that organization, what they were looking for, and if it would be a mutual fit for us. So and you will also want to talk to friends and family who have immigrated, learn about their experience. Everybody has a different path. So there's no one right way to find a job in Canada. There are many different ways you can go about this. But the more information you have, the better you'll be able to figure out which is the best way for you. And if you work in an industry that has a professional association, I highly recommend reaching out to that professional association and looking for more information. So whether you go on their website and you just do online research, or you email somebody that works there, it's a really great resource to learn about their industry within a Canadian context, what's going on, where the jobs are located, what the job prospects are like. I definitely recommend setting some short and long-term goals. So set a short-term goal that's realistic for your situation. So for example, if you need to find a job quickly, you're going to want to apply to more jobs rather than just pick and choose what's based on your current career. You'll want to have as many possibilities as are available so that you can gain employment quickly. But you'll also want to keep your eye on that long-term goal too, and keep on researching where your job fit is in Canada, because that's going to be really important for the next one of talking to people and networking. So when you're talking to people, you're going to want to have some goals in mind. You're going to want to have some sort of direction that you're interested in going so that they know how to help you. So I found that people are very willing to help and to put you in touch with people that might be a good connection for you, but they need to know who that is and what that is. So you're going to need to, when you're talking to people, to have something very specific in mind that you'd like to get out of your conversation with them, whether that's learning more about their job, their organization, if you're looking for connections that might be helpful in you determining where you want to go for a career. Just as long as you have a very specific ask, most people are very willing to help you. So just a quick session overview. So really the objective of the session is to increase your awareness and understanding of some common business communication skills in the Canadian workplace. So you'll be able to do a couple of different things when we're done. So you'll just have a better understanding of what is expected in Canada when you're in the workplace, both from your employer, but then also from your coworkers as well. And you'll be able to have a better handle on expected verbal, nonverbal, and written communication behavior, all of which are very important. And you'll learn how to build connections and rapport with your supervisors, colleagues, and others in your workplace. So here is a list of employer expectations, and these were the top 10 qualities and skills employers are looking for in 2015. And working in post-secondary education and in the field that I do, we work with those non-degree programs. So majority of our students are working professionals, and I can tell you that this list is still accurate in 2017. Now in this presentation, we're primarily going to be covering communication skills and the ability to work with others, so things like teamwork and building a rapport. But just so you have an idea of what some of these other skills might entail, we'll just take a look at a couple others, and we'll start off with honesty. So one of the things that your employer will expect from you coming into this Canadian context is that you are honest with them. So that just means that you are straightforward, that you're truthful, and that in doing so, you're also tactful. And we'll talk about some ways to be tactful later in the presentation. And so that some things you might want to be direct, and some things you might not, and it will be dependent on the situation. And this is why your first job in Canada is going to be a great learning experience, because you'll be able to practice some of these skills in your workplace. Problem solving is another skill your employer will expect from you. And in terms of problem solving, there are a couple of things that go into that. So you're going to be drawing on your previous experience and your current experience in order to come up with solutions for situations you're going to encounter. It could be every day, it could be a specific problem your employer has. problem solving will require you to draw on your experience. It might require you to draw on others' experience. So this is where building connections with your coworkers is really going to be an important part of your day-to-day work. Having flexibility. So this means that sometimes you might be working on something and your employer might have a different priority, something that's a little bit more urgent. And so there will be the expectation that you are able to move to another task and that you'll be able to transition quickly and seamlessly. So that flexibility is definitely one thing that you'll be encountering. Work ethic and determination and persistence. Those go a little bit hand in hand. So that's the idea that you're going to work through a problem. If you're problem solving, for example, that you're going to continue to work on that problem. And if you reach a stopping point where you don't feel you can go any further, that you ask for others' assistance. So that could be a coworker, it could be your supervisor, it could be somebody that is elsewhere in the organization, but that you continue to seek the answer or the solution that you're looking to find. And then I'd also look at loyalty. So loyalty would be things like not being negative about your employer, either whether that's to your coworkers, publicly. You don't want to be negative on social media, for example. So if you are on something like Facebook or LinkedIn, you always want to have a positive or neutral perspective about your employer. And that also means that the length of time that you stay with your employer as well. So your employer is investing money in hiring you by sending you the whole interview process and having the time that you go through your preliminary onboarding or training into the company. That takes time and money that your employer is investing in you. So the expectation is that you will stay with your employer, and this is dependent on your employer, and so you'll need to figure this out when you start your job, but traditionally that's somewhere between 6 months to a year, and sometimes people change careers more quickly, but it will be situational, so there's no one right answer, but employers tend to look for people who are interested in staying with them for a certain amount of time. So let's go into communication. So communication really with your employer really starts with any type of first impression. So this could be anything from a recruiter looking at your LinkedIn profile. It could be an informational interview that you have initiated with this organization. It could be a formal or informal conversation that you're having with somebody that works for an organization. So for example, a formal conversation would be something like you set up an appointment to talk to somebody, you have an objective if you want to learn more about their organization or what they do, that'd be more formal. And informal might be somebody that's a friend or a family member or somebody that your family member introduces you to. That's still a first impression that is going to carry back to your employment with that company. It could be an application that you fill out online or your resume. So it's really important to pay attention to these things before you initiate that job search, before you reach out to anybody at any one organization, to make sure that you have things like your LinkedIn profile set up. That is definitely one of those things that Canadian employers will expect to see, is some type of LinkedIn professional presence. It doesn't have to be, extensive, but it's important to have something online in terms of LinkedIn. It's also really important to have those short-term and long-term goals firmed up a little bit. You'll definitely want to have a list of questions that you're curious about. So it could be anything from, I'm really curious to know more about your organization, what is the culture like, what are the leadership styles like, or it could be something like, what are the types of jobs that are available, these are my skills, how does that translate into your organization? On your resume, you're going to want to make sure that you have accurate information, that it isn't extremely exaggerated. So I know that, depending on where you're coming from and where you're used to working to, in some places it's perfectly acceptable to inflate things like statistics, data, numbers about yourself or the breadth of your responsibilities. But in a Canadian context, employers will expect you to be truthful. They will check your references. And so if there's any discrepancy between what you have on your resume or your LinkedIn profile and what they hear about you from others, that will be that will cause a situation in which the employer is less trustful of you. So I highly recommend being accurate on your resume. If you don't have exact dates, like you don't have the exact month you were employed somewhere, it's perfectly acceptable to use a year versus an actual month, but just make sure that you have that pretty accurate. And your application, and with just making sure that your information is accurate, that it is typo-free. Same thing with your resume. You might want to have somebody take another look at your resume, do a double check for spelling and things like that. So again, just establishing your LinkedIn account, preparing a resume, which are all things that ACCESS offers workshops on. So I highly recommend attending those. They're, I think, a great series of LinkedIn workshops that can be very helpful and help you set things up. And one other thing that I'd like to mention before moving on is in terms of tips for job searching in Canada, definitely current photo and contact information on your LinkedIn page. If you don't want to use a photo on your LinkedIn page, that's okay. It is preferred that people have an opportunity to see, see the face, put a face with your resume, but make sure that you have accurate contact information so that when people try to reach out to you, they're actually able to get a hold of you. Because that is just one thing that if there is a barrier to communication with you initially, I can tell you that that employer will probably not follow up with you again. So it's really important to make sure all of that information is accurate. And another thing that you might not experience until you're in Canada and you're job searching is a lot of jobs are found through connections. And so it's very important that you start your networking as soon as possible. You can also do that through LinkedIn, lots of great ways to do it. But that's where a lot of jobs exist that are not made publicly available. And a lot of times that's how people find out about them. So it's really important to keep up your networking. So after you've done your job searching, you've found a good job, you've applied, you've been successful, they've called you in, and they've asked you to come in for an interview, there are some things that you're going to want to keep in mind as you're preparing. So when you're preparing for your interview, you're going to make sure you review the job description so you have a really good understanding of what the job is. You probably already did this when you were doing your resume, but just so you have it at the top of mind. And when you're going through this job description, you're going to want to write down any questions that you have. So if there's a duty in the job description that's unclear, you don't understand and you would like more information on it, definitely document that. If you have questions that you'd like to know more about the organization, for example, with whoever is going to be your supervisor, what is their leadership style like? You're going to just want to take those notes down and any highlights you have and bring those with you to your interview. In terms of dressing, regardless of the organization, doesn't matter which one it is, you're going to want to dress conservatively and professionally until you learn more about the workplace culture. So once you start your job, if you do choose to work with that organization, they might have a different dress code. You could wear things that are more casual, but first impressions are very important. So you're going to want to dress your best and dress conservatively, professionally, and many times this means a suit, or for men would mean slacks and a tie and a jacket. For women, this could mean a skirt, professional top, sweater, and a jacket. Lots of different ways to figure out good things to wear. And one tip that you might find useful is that when you're trying to decide, what are the types of things I should be wearing, you might want to look at retailers. So for example, if you're looking for work attire, you might want to look at companies that are in Canada, like Hudson's Bay, for example, and you can go look at what's considered workwear, and that should give you a pretty good idea. Be pleasant and smile. They're excited to have you come and interview. They've chosen you out of probably a large pool of candidates. So be excited to be there, be confident. Arrive slightly early. This will give you enough time just in case traffic is bad, you can't find the location. It will also give you time to compose yourself before you go in for your interview so you don't feel rushed. If you have spare time while you're waiting for your interview, it's a good idea to review your notes because when you're sitting there, that's also a form of communication. So you're going to want to make sure that your potential employer understands that you're taking this process very seriously. And whomever you talk to when you walk into that office, whomever you come in and say, I'm here for this interview, you want to make sure to thank that person for their assistance. So during your interview, you definitely want to confidently introduce yourself to everybody in the room. It's likely that you'll have maybe 2 people on your interview panel, but you could have many more. I've been to interviews where I've had up to 7 people on an interview panel. So it's really good to introduce yourself to each person, go around the room and shake their hand. It's completely okay to approach people. You're going to want to make direct eye contact as you shake someone's hand and smile. That's going to be the first thing that their first impression of you, and direct eye contact, handshaking, and smiling will make them perceive you to be friendly and trustworthy. So also in your interview, I'd recommend, if you don't have an email, that they didn't send you an email with the names of your interview panel, I'd highly recommend writing down your interviewers' names, because that's going to come in important a little bit later. If you're going through and you don't understand something, or you need clarification or more information about a question, completely fine. It's okay to ask. Just, ask someone to repeat something, take the time to write something down. You could also, ask them to rephrase the question in a different way. And you're going to want to answer questions thoroughly. So if the question that you're asked, say you don't have direct experience in that area, but you have transferable experience. So you've maybe worked on a project that's very similar, or you've had a project where you've used very similar skills. It's completely okay to say, I have this transferable experience. Employers are going to appreciate that, because that'll show that you have a better understanding of what they're asking for. And just one other thing, when you come into the room, most people will show you where to sit. So your interview panel will probably already have a spot for you. But before you sit down, if they don't, it's important to ask, where would you like me to sit? Just so that everybody is positioned in their correct place. So a couple of things to remember from your interview. Don't be negative about your past employer or your past experience. It's okay to come up with reasons and rationales that you might have left a previous position. It wasn't a good fit, wasn't a good cultural fit. It's, things you decided that you wanted to move on and work at a different job, that you wanted to try to build new skills. There are lots of positive ways that you can phrase why potentially you left your past employer. I mean, and one of them, if you're immigrating to Canada, a great reason is that you immigrated to Canada. Don't talk or ask about compensation at this point. Salary is very important, as are any type of benefits package that comes with your job, but the interview stage is not necessarily the time to do that. Many jobs will require a second interview and then a call back after that. So as soon as you've made it through successfully, your employer will talk to you about compensation. So it's really important to leave that to a later time in your interview process. And don't leave without saying thank you. You're going to want to thank everybody in the room for their time, because they took time out of their day to be with you. They're excited to meet with you. So be confident and be positive. Just remember to say thank you when you leave. And after the interview, so when you wrote down the names of your interviewers, if possible, you're going to want to try to get the email addresses of those people who interviewed you. And I'd recommend just sending a personalized thank you email. And it doesn't have to be anything that is elaborate. You could just, very simple and professional thank you. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. It was great meeting you, great talking with you. And one thing that I personally like to do, if possible, is I like to reference something that they asked me in the interview. So if they asked me a question, I'll reference that again, and I'll follow up with more information. Or if there's something I didn't get to say that I really wished that I had, or information I wish I had shared, I'll put that in the email as well. But remember to keep it short, so maybe about a paragraph, and just a basic, if you don't want to add additional information, just a basic thank you is all you need to do. You're going to want to follow up with your interview contacts. So if you were talking to an HR representative and they've given you a timeline of when they're going to get back to you, you'll need, if they haven't gotten back to you when they said they would, then it's okay to follow up with them. It's also okay to email and ask, what are the next steps? I'd like an idea of the timeline. And continue to apply and interview for jobs, because you might find that you're not a successful candidate. You might also find that there is another job opportunity that is better fit for you. So when you send your thank you email, don't expect a response from the interview panel. One of their jobs is to remain impartial and unbiased about you as a candidate. So they probably won't respond, but they're not being rude. It's just that part of their process and their job in that role is to remain impartial. So in order to maintain that, many people won't respond. And then don't follow up with the interviews after your thank you email. So unless they've reached out to you and they've said, oh, it was great meeting you, feel free to contact me at any time. I wouldn't follow up with the interview panel. Again, their job is to remain impartial. So that's one way that they can do that. So once you've gone through the interview process, you've been successful, you've gotten the job, there are a couple of things that you're going to want to remember or know when you're actually in your position. So one of these, we're going to focus on verbal communication first. So this is kind of the tone and the manner and the timing of when you speak. So, and this is very important. And much like dressing for your interview, a lot of the times it's good to be conservative and reserved up front, so that you can have time to gauge what is acceptable in that workplace, because everywhere is going to be different. There are going to be some organizations where they, are very vocal and people talk a lot, and there are lots of meetings. And then there are going to be some organizations that are a little bit more reserved, where it's very hierarchical, and maybe somebody on a supervisory level talks first and then it goes down from there. But it's going to be really dependent on your workplace. So you'll definitely want to speak in an even tone that's volume appropriate. So really gauge your setting. So if you're in a meeting room and you're in a meeting room with maybe 5 people, you're not going to want to speak really loudly, because that will come across as potentially aggressive or yelling, which are 2 things we don't want to do. You're going to want to speak clearly and slowly, just so that everybody understands what you're saying, that they have time to absorb it, because it depends on the type of room you're in. It also depends on the people that you're working with. You're going to want to speak to everyone with the same level of respect. So regardless of their position, doesn't matter if it's your supervisor, your coworker, or somebody that's organizationally on a position that's lower than you are, you're going to want to be respectful to everyone. This will go a really long way in help building relationships with your coworkers, also with your supervisor, not only because you'll be able to work better together, but then they'll be able to see that you've treated everyone with equal respect. That will be something that is perceived to be very positive with your employer. You'll definitely want to contribute your opinions and your ideas. This is why you're there. This is why they've hired you. They value your skills, so they want you to share them and use that knowledge to make their organization better. And if you don't understand, it's perfectly fine to ask questions. Don't feel like, you don't need to be uncomfortable and not ask questions. It's better to seek clarity. If you're uncomfortable doing this in a meeting setting where there are multiple people, that's okay too. It's perfectly fine to ask then, but at a later date, you can follow up with a colleague, you could follow up with a person who organized and ran the meeting, or you can follow up with your supervisor. Again, don't yell or raise your voice. In Canada, this is considered unacceptable across all work organizations. It's considered unprofessional, and will not be looked at as a positive attribute. Don't speak quickly or quietly. Depending on the acoustics in the room, depending on somebody's level of hearing, it might be, or how many people are talking at the same time, it might be difficult to hear, so always better to speak at a moderate tone. Don't interrupt others when they're speaking. That's a really important thing. Sometimes, if you're very enthusiastic and you have a really good point that you want to get across, sometimes it can be hard not to stop someone from talking because you're so excited. However, it's considered polite to wait until somebody has finished talking. If for some reason you can't seem to break into the conversation, one thing that can be very helpful is you catch the eye of the moderator or whoever's running the meeting. And usually once you make eye contact with someone, they'll recognize that you want to say something and open up a space in the meeting. Another thing that you could do is raise your hand halfway, like, oh, I have something to say, and usually people will let you break into the conversation then. Another thing, don't cover your mouth with your hand when speaking, because some people rely on reading lips in order to be able to understand people more clearly, particularly if it's a loud room. People will have the opportunity to see your lips move. It's also, when people cover their mouth, it could be perceived to be a sign of dishonesty. it could be perceived to be that. And don't be aggressive or demanding. And sometimes it's hard to define what could be perceived as aggressive or demanding. And it depends, and it's situational. So, for example, if there's something that you need from somebody, there's a coworker who hasn't followed up on a deadline, and you really need the information that they have. In that situation, it's best to either go to that person directly or email them and say, the deadline is passed. Could you please follow up with this information for me? And can you let me know if this is feasible by the end of the day? So you're just going to be polite the first time around. Everything is situational, so you might need to follow up several times in order to get something from someone. But just remember they're your coworker. You're trying to build a long-term relationship. But this is, again, situational. It will depend on your organization, their organizational culture, your relationship with that other person, lots of different things to think about when in there. So, like I said before, your employer wants your opinion. They want you to contribute your ideas. But one thing that's very common in Canada is that if you don't agree with someone, that's completely okay to say that you don't agree. But it's usually nice to preface it with something like, I respectfully disagree. That you acknowledge that there is a disagreement, not that the other person is particularly wrong or bad, but just that you mutually can't come to a decision on what's mutually agreeable. So it's usually nice to premise those things with, I respectfully disagree, before giving your opinion. So nonverbal communication is actually about 80% of all communication. So it's all of the things that you are not saying. So it's everything from your eye contact, your gestures, your posture, and your facial expressions. So just a couple of really easy tips to remember. In Canada, it's considered polite to leave about 12 to 14 inches of space between yourself and others. Now, this will vary depending on the situation. Also, as you get to know people, your personal space might get closer, but arm's length is usually considered appropriate in Canada in terms of school space. This is for office, but as well as public space. Depending on where you are in Canada when you've immigrated, or if you're already here, if you're in a highly populated area, so say you're in the general Toronto area, say you're working downtown, particularly at rush hour, space is going to be very tight. There's not going to be a lot of personal space, so it's great to be respectful of others and try to keep that arm's length space. Not always possible though. Making eye contact when you're speaking to them or being spoken to, that shows the person that you're talking to that you are listening to them, you are engaged, so you're interested in what they're saying. And you don't have to look at people constantly, but it's good to make eye contact now and again. If you're uncomfortable making eye contact with somebody, that's okay too. It's a really handy tip is you can either look at the middle of their forehead or you can look directly behind their shoulder. People won't be able to tell that you're not looking at them directly in the eye, but it will have the same effect as doing so. Facial expressions, also something really important to remember, particularly when you're in meetings, because people might not be speaking to you directly, so you might be a little bit less engaged, but it's really important to maintain a positive or a neutral facial expression. Frowning will be perceived as negative, regardless of whether you meant it to be negative or not, so it's really important to just be conscious of how your face sits. In terms of body posture, you're going to want to sit or stand up straight. This will relay confidence. It'll also relay that you're interested in what people are saying. If you lean in just slightly or lean forward, that indicates that you're more interested in what they're saying. In terms of arm and hand placement, it's really important to remember to not cross your arms. So crossing your limbs in front of you indicates that you're not open to what people are saying. So if you're crossing your arms, it means that you're feeling closed off, that you're disagreeing with what they're saying, and sometimes it's perceived to be a hostile stance. So it's often better to keep your arms at your sides. You can fold your hands. You can, have your arms behind your back. Anything but crossing your arms directly in front of your body, because that could be perceived to be negative. In terms of gestures, avoid wild gestures. So some people like to talk with their hands, perfectly fine, but it's situational. So if you're in a meeting, probably not a good idea to use wild or very sweeping gestures. But if you're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody, that's more acceptable. And gesturing in front of your face is never a good idea. That's only because people like to look at your face when you're talking. They want to be able to gauge different things from you, like interest and trust. And if you block that, then that blocks their view of your face. Couple of tips for meetings in Canada. So it is customary to turn your phone off or to silent if you're expecting something important that just can't wait, or if you have a family emergency, or if there's something going on that you feel that you need to have your phone accessible. Polite to turn it on silent or on vibrate. Keep it in your pocket or keep it in your lap versus on whatever desktop you're using. If you need to leave early, let whomever is facilitating the meeting know before the meeting starts. That's customary. And if you can't attend, let the organizer know. And this is if you're running late, something comes up, you're not able to attend at all, or if they send a meeting invite and you can't attend at that time. If somebody sends you a meeting invite and you can't attend at that time, customary to let them know that that timing isn't a good time for you, and perhaps they can reschedule the meeting so that you can attend. Written communication, extremely, extremely important, especially in today's workplace. You might be working with coworkers who are located internationally. You might be working with people who are located in the same building, could be in a different province. So you're going to be relying probably pretty heavily on email in a lot of workplaces. This also includes things like handwritten notes, text messaging. There are a couple of things that you're going to want to remember that will help you build rapport with your colleagues, make your work life easier. So in emails in particular, because this is going to probably be one of the primary ways you communicate with your coworkers and your boss, you're going to want to remember the tone and style will depend on whom you're writing to. So your boss may require more formal communication, or say it's your boss's boss, you'll definitely want to be more formal in your email, whereas a coworker might be more informal. And what I mean by formal is you'll definitely want to have a lot of the things we talk about here, which is, having a professional greeting like good morning, hello, good afternoon. You're going to want to have a very prescribed way that you write your email. Whereas with a coworker, you might be able to use more casual language like hi, how's it going, that type of thing. So when you use your emails, you want to use a subject line that explains the purpose, that's very direct, so that whomever you're sending it to knows exactly what the topic is when they open up the email. That'll help people determine the priority in which they need to respond to your email. If something is very urgent, you should say that in the subject line so they know that they should open it more quickly. Again, it's customary to include a greeting, and this is where formal and informal will come into the situation. So hello, good morning, good afternoon, good day. Those are more formal, formalized greetings, but a coworker, you could use hello, you could use hi, and that could be more informal. It's customary to include an icebreaker. Some of these things are things that you would do if you met somebody in person. People often forget about doing that in written communication, but it does really go a long way to maintain a positive level of communication with people. So just things that you would probably do in person, like hope you had a good weekend, hope you're doing well. And you're going to want to specify the purpose in your first sentence. So it's similar to your subject line. You're going to elaborate on your subject line. So I'm writing to share information about whatever it is, or I'm writing information to share information about this project, or I need to ask you a question, that type of thing. If you need the person to respond, ask them to do so and be specific. So if you're working on a timeline, let that person know that you have a timeline. You need this response by whatever time it is that you need it in order to meet your deadline. And if you need specific information, include that too. It's very helpful. I'm sure you all know everybody gets a lot of email every day, and it can be difficult to parse out what it is that you need to pay attention to and what you don't. So it's very helpful if you can recap for people in emails and include a closing. And this also, again, depends on formal and informal, but formal would include things like regards, best regards, kind regards, whatever suits your personality. Thank you is always a good closing to have in there. You could say have a good evening, have a good weekend, things like that. So tips for emails in Canada. So be personal, include a greeting. That goes a long way. It's especially important if you haven't met that person in person. So if you've never met face-to-face, that person is going to be their first contact with you. You want to make sure that they have a positive experience with communicating with you. And so a good way to do that, that's very easy, is to include a greeting and to just be very polite in your email. And to respond within 24 business hours. Sometimes this won't be possible, but try to make an effort to respond quickly. That way people understand that you are reading your email, that you have read their email, that you find it important, and you follow up. And another thing that I don't have on the slide but is really important is if you can't respond to someone's email within a certain time frame, or you don't have an answer, it's good to let them know that you've seen their email, that you're following up on it, and that you'll respond when you have an answer. Good to let people know where you are in the process. So just a quick couple of last things. Communication on the job. So building connections with your coworkers, your colleagues, and your supervisor is going to be extremely important. It will make your work life much easier. It'll make it more enjoyable, and you will have an easier time of getting things done, faster response time from your coworkers. So when you come into your workplace in the morning, you're going to want to greet people. A simple hello, good morning is sufficient, but you're going to want to greet everybody that you come in contact with. So it doesn't matter their position in the company or your organization. It's always nice to say hello, smile at people. If you're trying to build connections with new coworkers, if there's a lunchroom or an opportunity to connect with people, take that opportunity when you first start. So if there's a lunchroom, eat in the lunchroom instead of at your desk. If people go out for coffee, try to join the coffee group. If there is a coffee machine, use the coffee machine versus getting coffee before you come to work. Just simple things like that. Anytime that you can have an opportunity to connect with your coworkers is a good opportunity. I highly recommend taking it. Depends on your workplace. They might have specific events where coworkers will get together. It might be more informal, but it's really important to take that time to get to know the people that you're working with. If you want to start a conversation with somebody, you don't have a good idea of what's appropriate to ask, there's some really great things that you can start with that are very neutral questions. So, for example, when you start in a workplace, one thing that I like to do is I like to set up really short meetings with people. So I'll set up maybe like a 15-minute meeting, and it's just to get to know them. That's it. No other purpose. So I get to learn more about their job. And in doing that, I'll also get to learn more about them, which is also helpful. So a couple of neutral questions that you could ask, and being new, it's very appropriate. So how long have you worked here? What are your plans for the weekend if you're coming on a weekend? And it's also good to ask about things that are nearby. So if you're new to your environment, new to your workplace, and the people that you're working with have been around for at least a couple of months, they're going to be able to recommend places that you can go that are nearby. So you could ask about coffee, tea, places to eat. If you need to purchase something, you can ask your coworkers. It's a really good conversation starter and really neutral space. There are some sensitive topics that you don't want to start off with. As you get to know somebody, your relationship with them might go to more of a friendship level, but until that point, in Canada, it's good to avoid talking about religion, age, people's income, personal health matters, or sexuality, unless people bring it up first. So if people bring it up first, that's an indicator that this is a topic that they are comfortable talking about. I still at that point would not probe too deeply with too many questions, because while they may be comfortable talking about it, they may not be comfortable in being asked questions about it. But if people do share too much detail and it makes you uncomfortable, that's okay too. All you have to do is change the conversation to a more neutral topic. And again, you could loop back to those neutral questions and focus on things that are less personal. For example, your workplace. So asking questions about your workplace, asking questions about policy at your workplace, really good neutral places to go. And look for common interests. So when you have any type of conversation with anyone, it's always good to have like a couple of minutes of small talk before you get down to what your objective is. So good things to ask are, how was your weekend? What did you do on the weekend? Do you have recommendations for good books? What do you like to read? That type of thing. Anything that could be considered neutral. So a couple of tips for connecting with coworkers in Canada. So give credit where credit is due. Don't be afraid to publicly thank a coworker or give them credit for a good idea. People will appreciate the fact that you did give them credit for a good idea or that you mutually worked on something together. Maintain a positive attitude. People like to be around positive people, and so it's important that you maintain a positive attitude, particularly in your first couple of months at any workplace. And don't gossip or speak ill of others, because generally when people tend to do that, and if you're the first person to do that, people will wonder if you do that about them. So it's always best to just remain positive, not get involved in office politics or gossip. It will make your work relationship with everybody in the office a lot smoother. So just a couple of key takeaways. There are many different communication styles and preferences. So everything that you encounter in terms of communication is going to be situational. And that might seem intimidating, but the points that we've covered in this presentation are really good starting points. So you can feel free to rely on those as places to start. Being respectful and polite at all times, and working to build connections with your colleagues. This, again, will make work more enjoyable, and it will make it easier. People will be more excited to work with you when the opportunity arises. So great. I think we're probably at that point where we can go to question and answers.
Thank you so much, Audrey, just for a very informative webinar today. And I myself learned a lot from you as well. And I hope that our audience has as well.